Brilliant. Well, hi, I'm Dave Mckeown, and it's so good to be here today on our Church Explained podcast, a conversation to grow your leadership and build your teams.
Yeah, I wonder, Steve, I was just thinking on this giving power away and delegating and, allowing people to try. If you have any strategy or anything that you do that, when you want to take control, you kind of don't you allow things to take place. I wonder if you have any kind of strategy that would help a leader who's thinking, I want to delegate stuff, but there comes that moment where I see it this way and I want to grab control. I wonder if you have any strategy or anything that you do.
Yeah, great question. I do remember hearing Andy Stanley speak about delegating and people coming up with ideas. And he said something like this. I may not have the exact quotes, but it was make your first response wow, not how. Mm-hmm. And I've tried to do that because my propensity is when someone comes up with something, I've given them authority, they come up with something, is to go into the weeds and seeds and say how. Whereas rather, I'm genuinely trying to step back. And this is a strategy I do. I'm telling myself in my brain, don't say how, don't say how. Just go, wow, what a great idea. And then allow them to give space to do the how. Mm-hmm. And it's sometimes in that how that I can have a little bit of say into it. But I genuinely try and, if someone hadn't taken the risk with me, I mean, when we moved to Cambridge, I was 32 years of age. Most of our lead team are in that kind of region now, 32, kind of 28 to 32. I was given a lot of space. And younger than that as well. I mean, I remember I went into full-time ministry at the age of 25. I've never had a proper job since. Just kept on doing it. So people gave me a lot of trust. So I think it's mostly, okay, I'm going to trust them and I'll be there to take the flack with them if it doesn't work, as much as the glory is when it does. Because I think we like to take the glory. But if it goes wrong, I'm not going to hide behind them and say, oh, it was your idea. Then I step in and say, we decided this. If I gave you the authority, so people can, I'm more happy today for people to give me the complaints and protect them if I can possibly do that. I can't protect them fully, but I've heard so much stuff over the years. I think I can ride it out a little bit better than they can. I think. I'm still a human being, so I don't like that. But yeah, the wow, the how, and then generally letting them come up with the strategy, but being ready to have a little hand on the tiller in that process and then take the complaints afterwards if they come.
Sounds like a great strategy, that, Steve, especially with a multi-site sort of setup, because it could be so easy, as you say, to go back and just be involved in every detail at every campus, which is just, it's obviously not good for growth, really, is it? So it's just, as you say, thinking bigger. Absolutely. And releasing people to do the stuff.
Yeah, and you're right there, Dave, about multi-site. We found multi-site is not for everyone. And I know, in some places it's getting a bit of a bad press these days and they're taking it back in. But for us, it was a God-given strategy. Yeah. But it won't work if you are over-controlling from central. I don't think, in our model. So we have to give genuinely authority to those that are location-based and pastors there.
Brilliant. So, Steve, just thinking of the opportunities ahead, thinking of I suppose I'm trying to think of the global church, but also your church as well. I wonder for you, what do you think the future looks like for the church? What are the opportunities? That's maybe address it from a global setting, if we can do that. Maybe if you have some insight into that, and then maybe into your setting as well there, Cambridge.
Yes. Well, we're in an interesting time globally, aren't we, for the church? We're recording this when there's a lot of turmoil and stuff that's coming out. I have tried to avoid personally wading in on the negativity that comes, and I don't like. people pointing fingers and saying, I told you so. There's a lot of negativity around celebrity pastors. You can be a celebrity pastor with 50 people. We'll never hear about the stuff that goes on there. This is my view now. You can disagree with me, but because people have high profile positions, we hear about that and the media get onto it. But anyone has that temptation in any setting. So I think there is a bit of a reset moment going on that is both as a consequence post-COVID. And I think people are rightly looking at the models that they've got and thinking, should they change? And my view on that is if God tells you to change it, change it. If you're still content with the model that you had pre-COVID, because God had told you that and he hasn't changed his mind on it, then stay with it. Don't be tempted to... I think the church historically, and particularly charismatic churches, can sometimes get into fads. So this is the latest fad. And I want to avoid fads. I think keep the main thing, and listen to God for yourself in your own location. Learn from others, but don't copy others. What's the best for you? When I say don't copy, I mean, I've copied a lot of people. So I mean, adapt it to your context.
Yes.
Know where you are. Learn from them what they're doing, but you don't have to become a carbon copy of them. So I think it is a reset moment, and I'm glad to hear a lot of churches are reviewing what they're doing and thinking of doing it differently. Wonderful. If that's what God tells you. The key in all we do, I know this is so obvious, but it's hearing the voice of the Lord. What's God saying to you? And I think God is interested in locations. Look at Revelation, where Jesus speaks to different local churches. There are different things that one local church has to do as opposed to the other. And that's the first recorded direct words we have of Jesus post-resurrection or post-ascension rather. And it's to local churches. So he has a real love for the local church. So I would say, hear God for yourself. And I think that's going on. And I think it's forced people to do that. So that's wonderful. I do think there is an opportunity technologically, if I can say it in that way. I think we should all, we were all before, but we are now, we should all be using technology in order to further the gospel. That's where people are. And the way it's gone, that is an opportunity. So I think everyone should look at that with whatever resources they've got and say, how can we leverage that in the 21st century after COVID? Because it gave us an absolute boost to move things forward. I know some churches, and people will hate this, and we're not looking at it yet, but they're looking at virtual church that has to do with, putting on the headsets and that kind of thing. It'll probably come in. You know, people said, I'll never go online, and they're all online now. They had to. So virtual reality churches will probably develop. If you were to ask me, do I ever think that will replace gathered physical? I don't think it ever will. I think it'll be a supplement, and I think it's a very positive supplement, but I don't think it'll ever take the need for community being in flesh and blood at some point as well. So I still think there's an opportunity for that, because I think people realized how lonely they were and how isolated through lockdown. So I'm sure we're the same as many churches. Although we haven't seen everybody come back, we have seen a lot of new people. And often the cry that is there for them is, we want to connect with people. We want to talk to someone. People are more isolated than ever. So I think we've got an opportunity to demonstrate how church can be true community, and it can demonstrate a unity like no other organization on the face of God's earth. In our differences, we can be unified. So I think we've got an amazing opportunity technologically, socially, because of the needs of society, particularly around loneliness. But I think as well, we're going into a season again now where interest rates are going up, the inflation's high, people are struggling to pay bills. So there's a lot of need out there. And I think the church can help meet those needs. Now, it's not all that we should be doing. We've tried to keep proclamation of the gospel, what it is, alongside social action, and do both. It's not either or. I think we have an opportunity to meet felt needs, real needs in the world around us.
Yeah.
You know, Ukraine and Christians taking people in is an opportunity to demonstrate the love of God, and that people will see something of God's love and God's message through us. So I'm not, it is hard times out there, let's be honest with people, but it gives the church a great opportunity.
Yeah. Just picking up on something you said, Steve, actually, I think it's just amazing insights, but you're talking about hearing God. You know, if you hear it from God, I wondered if you had one thought, one thing that you do to hear God for your church that could help, as a leader, someone who's leading something, who's thinking, I want to hear God, but I'm not hearing God. Is there something that you do to hear God for the church?
Yeah. I suppose a few things come to mind. Number one is get alone with God. I think in our busy world, we've probably neglected the discipline of solitude more than anything. So I don't tend to hear God in the busyness. I usually hear God in the coming out. Now, and you need to find what works for you. For me, being in creation, walking out in the countryside, I feel like I hear God. It's one of the things I enjoy when I'm fishing, if I'm honest. Although I've got to be truthful, when I'm fishing, I'm usually just trying to catch fish, so I don't want to make that too spiritual. But because it's recreation, and I think we need that. So time solitude with God. If I haven't got time alone with God, my soul suffers. So that's one thing. The danger of that, so let me bring in another thing that balances that. I think we have to be very careful that I don't think that I'm Moses going up the mountain that then comes down with the word from God. So I also think the second part of it is that needs to be tested in a community of friends and leaders. So as that together we say, yeah, you feel you've heard God in that, and anyone else can have heard God, but let's seek God together in that. So prayer in leadership contexts and sounding out what we believe is also important. And I know those two can sound a contradiction, but I don't believe they are. I believe it's just something we have to hold together. I can hear God in my alone time, but I don't want to be so separate in my leadership that not to bring it into a corporate context. So it needs to be tested amongst us, and then together we will do that, work that out.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Actually, brilliant thoughts there, Steve, on that. And I think it's good because it takes the pressure off a little bit as well for the senior leader, doesn't it? That they don't have to be Moses going up the hill.
Absolutely.
Because I think years gone by, that was probably the thing that most senior leaders or people in roles like that thought, I have to be the person, they get the vision, they get everything.
Yeah.
But there's something powerful, as you say, about having something, but actually putting it within the community.
Yes.
The community of leaders or those around you, and actually the responsibility lies with the group and not just the individual. Yeah. And I think there's something powerful in that leaders can learn. So rather than feeling isolated and maybe struggling to think, how am I going to know what God's saying? To actually trust that God's put people around you, that those people also can hear as a community together to forge the way forward.
Most certainly. And I think in our language, we try to do this. We try to say we rather than me.
Brilliant.
Great.
So when we did our Vision Sunday, it'd be an example of this. We tried to, I could have got up and said it all, but we had different people who were speaking at different times, people who have portfolio responsibility, but it also demonstrated to me we're in this together, because what people see is what they think, oh, that's what's happening. So it was more than one voice. So the language of we and doing it together is really important. And also the ability for that team, particularly with the senior leader or leaders, to be able to say no. And there are times when our guys have said to me, we just don't think that's right, or it's not right for now.
Yeah.
Let's hold it. Let's hold it off. And I think, again, with all that's going on in the world about leaders need to be able to demonstrate that sense. I don't like this word, not because I'm afraid of the word, but because it's used as a hammer against people. The word accountability.
Yeah.
But I think you do need it.
Positive accountability.
Absolutely, you do need it, and you got to. If people say no, you got to be able to take that.
Brilliant.
Now, some great insights that people can take forward. We're going to change tack a little bit and talk buildings. You mentioned it earlier. You've been part of the building project there in Cambridge, building a church, incredible building. And we haven't got time to share the whole story. Maybe we'll do that another time. But I wondered if you could just inspire, or some things that you took from that building project that could instruct other people who are going through that same process at the moment.
Yeah. I think I'd say, remember, we've been here 28 years. It was very early on in our time here that we thought we really need a facility to be able to advance the cause. But Cambridge, there's been a lot of competition. So I'd say be careful not to compromise with competition for land, competition for buildings. You know, Microsoft, Apple, whoever you're competing against, they're coming into the city. It's not easy. So I'd say don't compromise what you want ultimately. So we waited and waited, and then this site came up, which was an old church site, 1930s, 1960s build, which was within the centre of Cambridge. It's not the very centre because that's King's College and all the colleges that are there, but it's on the edge of centre. So it's CB1, which is the postcode, which is really where we wanted. Now, I've got to be honest, I'm saying don't compromise because I was tempted so many times to compromise and find a building out there or a building there, but it would not have served the purposes or done what we did. So be careful not to compromise. And if that's going to take you longer, better to wait than get the wrong building. I think the other thing is realize every delay serves you a good purpose. So we had so many delays. I could tell you story after story of builders that promised the earth and then didn't come back with the quotes and all kinds. But every delay served for a purpose for us to get the right place, or even simply to have more time. I used to think time was an enemy. Time was a friend in the end because it enabled us to save more money, enabled us to get our ducks in a row, wherever that phrase comes from, enabled us to, even on the building, when our first builders dropped out and they threatened us with court action and all kinds, say they dropped out, we pulled out from them because we found out they were in actually a very precarious administration position and we were going to be their rescue. But that was a big disappointment to go to the church and say, you know, we said we were going to build. Well, we can't because the builders, who were the cheapest by a long way, they're not in a position to make this happen. So we got to go to the next group, and the next group was another £1 million, and we didn't have that £1 million. But it gave us time to value engineer the project and to save. So it took us another 9 months, and in that 9 months we raised a lot more money. So it was to an advantage. And also, and I can't tell the stories because of time, but when we moved in, we were phasing the building. Well, we had an old building, which we didn't own, but at that point we thought, let's try and get ownership of it. Well, 25 years earlier, we tried to get ownership of it, and we were told we couldn't. Because 25 years had gone past, different legislation, different things had happened, different examples. We were then allowed to get it. And we were able to sell that building to another church, which had only just planted into the area, so they were looking for a building. And to be honest, they couldn't afford it either. They were only able to do it because a consortium of businessmen were able to do it for them, who just offered to do that for them on a house. And they said, don't do it on the house, do it on the building. So what I'm saying is the timing of God, and then they paid us $1 million, and we were able to finish off the rest of the building. So amazing. Every delay turned to our advantage. I just need to remember that ongoingly, because I want things to happen fast. But it served to our advantage. I think the last thing I'd say about buildings, remember, buildings do speak. Architecture speaks. So when you're building, be careful how you build. Use the right people to help you. I've had people join us simply because they drove past the building. They didn't know anything about it, but they thought, that's a nice looking building. Oh, it's a church. And they came in. I've got a pair of glasses here, which I'll take these off. A guy bought me. I was talking to him, and my glasses broke. And I said, oh, I like your glasses. And he said to me, I'll take you to my optician's tomorrow to buy you some. And he bought me those. Most expensive pair of glasses I've ever had. They're not great for a computer. That's why I'm changing them now. But my point was, he said, I joined this church because I drove past and saw your building. He said, and I love it. It's done well. So architecture does speak, and you reap the benefits of that, even if it's only a pair of glasses.
Yeah.
Well, amazing.
We all need to see things right, don't we? Well, say no more. Hey, you had a few good thoughts in there, really. And maybe we will come back and do another podcast with you, Steve, around the buildings, and maybe people are thinking through that. It might be useful at some point in the future. But I love that nugget of idea there, that actually time is our friend. It's not our enemy. And I think that's key, because a lot of people in church feel time's against us. We're in a rush. We've got to do it quick. It's all going to happen. But sometimes when we do that, we compromise creativity, don't we? Because we're not given space and time to think, to dream. We want it done yesterday.
Absolutely.
And so I love that. Time is your friend. It's not your enemy.
And I think someone once said about God, God is not in a rush. It's one of his most infuriating attributes.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah,
I've understood that more.
Yeah.
I think if some things had happened when we wanted them to happen, I wasn't ready. We weren't ready as a people. And so there is something of the timing of God in all of it.
So, Steve, we want to get to a couple of more questions before we wrap up today. It's been brilliant to have you on the show. But can you share with us, and maybe all our listeners, who has been your biggest inspiration and why? Try not to say Jesus. We're taking that as a given. But if there's somebody else, sorry if I've racked that for you.
Oh,
do you know what I mean?
That's all I was going to say.
That's all. Yeah, no, go for it. Who's been your inspiration and why?
Well, it's an interesting question, because I think I go back in my mind to people who inspired me in early stages rather than in later stages. So I mentioned my mum. My mum was a superb communicator, and she was a leader in a context where women weren't allowed to lead.
Sure.
So she was a pioneer. So I saw the way she got knocked back simply because she was a woman in the context we were in. And I found that an inspiration, how she kept going. So I always learned from her, and life wasn't easy, and trials and stuff that we went through. I think she was the biggest influence on me of keeping going, of just keeping a positive attitude, and coming back even when you've been pushed back. So I think I have to say my mum in that context, and that's the why, because she was so determined. She was a wren in the war, in the Second World War, and I always remember a saying. She was eventually, they allowed her to splice ropes and things, because obviously she was in the Navy, the Women's Navy, and she said, I could splice as good as any man. And that was her kind of attitude. She wasn't anti-man, but she wasn't going to be pushed down when she knew she had gifting. And she was like that in communication. So her, I've been listening again to some music as well. When I was a teenager, music and Christian music was a big influence on me. But there was a guy called Keith Green who wrote a lot of radical, I'm listening to them again, radical songs about obedience and about sacrifice. In the church that I grew up in, the heroes were the missionaries that came in, and I'm grateful for that. They were willing to give their lives. I actually thought, I said this to my wife well, she wasn't my wife. She was 14, I was 16. I said to her, we're going to do something full time for Jesus, and will probably die for it, because that's what I was listening to. That's what I was, the music of Keith Green. So, and he died at a very early age in a plane crash. But I realized, listening back to it now, this was the 80s, what an influence that music, 70s and 80s, what an influence that music was on me. So he was a bit of a hero. Who else? Well, I'll stick with the music theme, because I went to a concert a couple of weeks ago by Graham Kendrick, and some of you won't know this, but he was a pioneer in Christian music, and I met him at one event last year, the last one. Again, I've met him a few times, but I'm totally overwhelmed by his humility. So at the concert we went to, a guy got up at the end and he said, my daughter's just home from university and I was going out tonight. So my daughter said to me, where are you going? And he said, I'm going to a Graham Kendrick concert. And she said, who's he? And everyone laughed, and he said, that shows maybe two things. Number one, my daughter's ignorance. But then he said, I decided to show my daughter a photograph of Graham Kendrick. He said, here he is. This is whose concert we're going to. And she said, him. That's the guy who leads worship in my church. So he said, so it's two things. One, my daughter's ignorance, or two, Graham Kendrick's humility. And I'm struck by that humility. And I'm looking around the world right now, inspiring me. And I think it's more humility than hype. There's been a lot of hype. And humility of people, and so people that show that, and Graham Kendrick, I think, shows that in absolute oodles of So there's three people: my mum, Keith Green, Graham Kendrick. I listen to different preachers all the time; they've inspired me. A guy I particularly like, I'd have said to you, he was my favorite preacher. Is a guy called John Ortberg. You may have read some of his books, but I like the way and I can't do this as well as him. I like the way he brings a knowledge of God and an understanding of people together. And I think that makes for a great preacher, great communicator. If you understand people, you understand God, and bring the kiss of those together, then you'll touch hearts. So he has been an inspiration to me as well.
Awesome.
Amazing. Well, Steve, as we're getting to the end, I wonder if there's another idea or something that you're thinking on that you could encourage our listeners with. What would that kind of idea or encouragement be?
Yeah, I think I've probably already said it, if I'm honest, but I'm trying to think of something different. I was going to say, be patient. People, 28 years here.
Yeah,
I had to find the miracle in the mundanity of life. So I suppose I'd say this: don't always be looking for the big flashy moments.
Yeah,
they happen. I've told you about some with the prisons and C3 Impact, and read a lady in our service the other week healed totally of a blind eye instantly. I'd like to give you 100 stories like that. I haven't got them, but they happen. But find the miracle in the mundanity. In the everyday, one foot in front of the other. Just keep going, because you'll realize after 10 years, I've got a lot further than I thought, but I thought I'd get there in one, but I've got there. Or in 20 years, or in my case, 30 years. Just keep putting one foot in the other and find God in those mundane moments of every day. I think that's what I would say to people.
Wow, that's fantastic, Steve. Steve, thanks for being on the show with us. We're going to wrap up at this point, and Nathan's going to share a couple more comments before we finish today. Thanks, Nathan.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. No, it's been so good to have Steve with us, and thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of the Church Explained podcast, everyone. If you could subscribe, rate, review wherever you're consuming this content, then that helps us massively. And share it with someone that you know that would be inspired or helped by this episode. Make sure you check out the show notes that you can find at icon.church/open, plus also a load of free resources. But we look forward to being together next time on the Church Explained podcast. We will see you soon.